12 days after all the celebration happens, presents under the tree, Silent Night has been sung. The poinsettias start to lose their leaves and leave a crinkly trail like breadcrumbs when you carry them out of the building. Decorations start to come down. The church marks a different celebration. And it's a strange one. It's the festival of the Epiphany, the celebration of when Jesus was made known, manifest, seen by outsiders who recognized who he really was. It's a story you've heard before, but I want to ask today that you hear it again as the story of love that wouldn't go away quietly. Love that includes the left out, and love that points us away from the usual order of power and violence to something new God is doing. Here's how the story goes. This is from Matthew's Gospel. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus had been born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men, magi, came from the east to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who's been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea. For so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. And then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Like I say, this is a story about love that wouldn't go unrecognized. Love that wouldn't go silently and unrequited. Let me back up for a minute. I think one of the greatest tragedies that can happen in this human life is for someone to love you, but you not to see it, for you not to know it, for you not to recognize it. Or on the flip side, for you to love someone, not necessarily romantically, although it could be a family member or a close friend, for you to love them and for them not to see it, not to know it, not to understand how deeply they are beloved. There are a million things that can get in the way in our relationships, that we don't recognize the love that's right in front of us. We don't understand where somebody's coming from. We don't realize the actions they've done for us out of love, that kind of thing. But it is one of the greatest tragedies that can happen in this life, for love to be unrecognized. And so I want to ask you to think for a moment about the story of Jesus being announced by this star in the sky and the arrival of the Magi, as God refusing to let that love go ignored. One of my favorite classic stories from literature, from way back in high school when I first read it all through today, was Cyrano de Bergerac. It was the story that has been remade a number of times. It was remade as the Steve Martin movie Roxanne. It's been remade again more recently with Peter Dinklage. And in the original, there's this character who is famous for having this extremely long nose that he thinks makes him completely unlovable and unlovely. And he is in love with Roxanne. But he's convinced that nobody could ever want him, nobody could ever love him, and Roxanne has a secret crush becomes not so secret with another more attractive fella who's sort of as dumb as a bag of hammers named Christian. In the course of the story, Cyrano helps Christian woo Roxanne. He gives him words. He writes love letters. He writes letters expressing his own love, but Christian claims them as his own. And Roxanne falls for the person she thinks is sending the letter. She falls in love with Christian, not realizing it's been Cyrano who has loved her all along. And at the end of the story, you find Cyrano and Roxanne have both grown old, had never gotten together, and until the very, very end, she realizes it had been Cyrano who had loved her deeply and truly and rightly all along, and she just never could recognize it. And Cyrano, for his part, had allowed that to happen by giving his words to somebody else to profess love to Roxanne. You can play it up as a comedy if it's Steve Martin, or you can hear it as a tragedy. How tragic it would be to know only after it was too late to do anything about it that you had been loved all along. And I want to suggest that something like that is the dilemma that God deals with in creation, in all of us, in the coming of Jesus. God's way isn't the overt, big, powerful display of might and wealth and pomp like Rome would do. When God steps into the scene in Jesus, it's this quiet, almost unnoticed sort of thing. Like a kid born in, as Luke tells it, laid in a manger. A child whose birth is unremarkable, as Matthew tells it. Matthew doesn't even give us a story of Jesus being born, just that he was born. They named him Jesus, and sometime later Magi showed up. The birth itself doesn't have a song and dance number, and God's coming in Jesus looks terribly ordinary, an ordinary human child, absolutely given out of love. Jesus is what it looks like when God's love takes on human skin and bones. Jesus is what it looks like when God comes in one of our own faces. And yet, it's so easy for us not to get it, not to recognize that Jesus is God's love for us. It would be so easy for that love to go misunderstood that God goes to great lengths, not only to love us, not only to send the Savior, but then to say, hey, everybody, I want you to know this is me loving you. This is my gift. Here I am for you. You might have missed me because it's not coming in the ways you were expecting. If you were anticipating, thunder and lightning from the clouds zapping the unrighteous and destroying sinners, if you were expecting a military parade like Rome does, if you were expecting the usual trappings of power and glory, sorry, get ready for disappointment. That's not how I've come. That's not what you need. But because it's not what you're expecting, it would be easy for you to miss. So God grabs the attention of people who are looking the other way, of these astrologers, these Zoroastrian, maybe priests or royal advisors from somewhere in the East who are convinced watching the stars they can get insights into events happening on Earth. And they see this thing in the sky, this light in the sky, star, comet, asteroid, who knows. They see this thing in the sky, and they're convinced it's telling them, go to the land of Israel, go to Judah, and find someone who has been born, who is a new king. And at first it seems like the plan is going to come undone because even these magi are thinking the place to look for a king is in the palace, in the capital, surrounded by military power, weapons and might and strength and glory and power. That's human thinking, right? That's conventional wisdom. That's where they go. They even go and meet with King Herod, who, when he hears the idea that there might be somebody else who's God's anointed leader, man, he throws a hissy fit, right? He sets into motion a plan, an almost Shakespearean plan to then go kill the child, root him out, and wipe out any children who will be left in Bethlehem before the dust settles at the end of Matthew chapter 2. Because everybody expects that God's love, God's power, God's presence can only come on the terms they are prepared for. God won't let that happen. God won't let the love that comes in Jesus go unrecognized. God won't let us go chasing after someone else thinking that's where God's presence is. God won't let us go chasing after Herod thinking that's God's presence in the world when really God's love has come in this fragile human child They're in a house somewhere in Bethlehem. God won't let the love go unrecognized. So God grabs a hold of these magi, drawing them in the first place, helping them to know something has happened, and this is for you, and making sure they are clear that it's not Herod's way, it's not the usual standard ways of empire, of power, of strength, of wealth. That's not the way God enters into the world. God shows up in smallness and ordinariness in the fragile human life of Jesus. But God doesn't want us to miss that we are being loved. God doesn't want us to miss that the gift is being given. I don't know if you ever had the experience of having somebody send you a gift that either didn't arrive or came late or came damaged, or the shipping company, the postal service, didn't send it to the right address, and the other person there is thinking, oh, I gave them this wonderful gift, and how come they haven't used it? How come I haven't seen them acknowledge that they got it? And what a tragedy it is to discover someone had given you something, someone had offered you something, and you missed it. You didn't realize it was there. It got sent to the wrong address. What a shame it is for that love not to come home, not to go to its recipient. And God won't let that happen in Jesus. So the child is born. There God offers love to the world, but also God gets the attention of outsiders who wouldn't have even known otherwise and says, no, this is for you too. It's important for us to recognize these magi who come, they are not the respectable religious people. These are not, the temple establishment in Jerusalem who are ardently waiting for the Messiah. These are outsiders. These are Gentiles. They're non-Jewish people who don't have a claim on this Messiah. And yet God reaches out to them and says, this is for you. Come and see. This love is for you. I don't want this love to go unrecognized. And I don't want people to end up chasing after the wrong thing when love has been waiting here for you all along. God won't let this love story end tragically, in other words. We know all too well, even in our day, what happens when people chase after wealth or power or the usual locations of wealth and power to get their way. We know what it's like when the Herods of the world decide they don't want not to be in power and not to be in control, and they'll do whatever it takes. They'll even violently smash stuff or go seek after things if they don't get their way. We know what that's like. And the story of Epiphany, the story of the Magi coming, is this reminder there is an alternative. We don't have to be sucked into the thinking of Herod. We don't have to be sucked into the thinking of conventional wisdom. We're invited something new. The love that comes in the fragile ordinariness of Jesus. The love that reaches out to include people who had been told they weren't good enough before, Gentiles who had otherwise would have had no clue that a Savior had been born for them. We're invited into the love that God makes sure we understand. It's good. It is absolutely good that Jesus came in this surprising, unexpected way, born by cover of night, presented to a bunch of nobodies, shepherds, without much fanfare, and without people's expectations of power and might and glory. That's the wonderful, delightful divine comedy of the gospel, that God comes in this fragile baby. But at that point, there is every possibility we will completely miss what God has given us in Jesus. We who are so focused on other things, we who are giving our attention and our worship of other voices, we who are so easily distracted by personal rectangles of technology and screens, we would so easily miss the gift God's love has given in Jesus. Epiphany is God making sure this love story doesn't end as a tragedy. God is here making sure that we don't find ourselves looking back after it's too late, going, oh, if only I had known I was loved all along. So hear it now. You have been loved all along. God's love here in Jesus is for you. And everything else changes in light of knowing you are God's beloved. There's nothing else you need to do. There's nothing else you need to change. There's nothing that makes you eligible. God's love embraces you, reaches out to you as sure as a star reaching out to foreigner magi who had never prayed to the God of Israel in their lives before. This love is for you. God goes to whatever lengths are necessary to make sure you don't miss it. You are loved. You always have been. That's the good news of Epiphany.